in about the 9th century, began a movement of translations. The bulk of Aristotle's work was translated, and the person who headed this whole translation movement, who started it, was the famous Al-Kindi. Without him, all this literature would not have been translated. Once it was translated, of course, it had an influence on the entire philosophical school of thought. You can imagine Aristotle is a very, very serious, philosopher, and he would obviously have a big influence on Muslim political as well as ethical and scientific thought, philosophical thought. Plato was not so much translated, by the way. And where Plato was translated, or where Aristotle was translated, or where things were attributed to Socrates, for them, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates more or less represented the same broad ideas, because it had already been distilled to them in some sort of synthesis that had already occurred in much of the Christian world and also in the Greek world, etc. So for that reason, they never engaged in the polemics between is Plato right or is Aristotle right, wala whole situation. Okay. So the great founder of political science is considered in the Islamic tradition. And when I say political science here now, I mean something quite specific, because he's not using religion to understand what should or shouldn't happen. He is using a new methodology, a new epistemology, in fact. He's trying to see what philosophy says on issues of politics, etc. That's why we are going to call it political science as opposed to theology. Because philosophy or political science, or whatever you want to call it, right, is different from theology in the sense that the epistemic basis of philosophy and science, etc., is rationality. So regardless of whether something agrees or disagrees with revelation, how do you try and understand how society exists, what's happening in society? You don't look at revelation. You look at something, the evidence and the logic, and you look at it through reason and so on and so forth. So who is the great founder? Al-Farabi also influences Ibn Sina and Ibn Bajjah and Ibn Tufayl and Ibn Rushd and many others, etc., etc. Thinking about governance, etc., also flourished amongst the Ismailis, who we'll talk about in just a second. Now, historians sometimes dismiss the philosophical movement within Islam because they're like, well, mainstream Islam is mainly shaped by the ulama. And that is true to some extent. It's not entirely incorrect. But this is a period of history in which philosophy plays a very, very important role. And thereafter, philosophy as an independent movement more or less is eliminated, in particular by Nizamul Mulk's madrasa system, which is very, very anti-philosophical, right? And also by the Ash'ari school of thought, which the madrasas adopt. So the madrasas are teaching Ash'ari school of thought like crazy, and they're anti-Mutazili, and they're also anti-Falsafa. So although that eliminates, but many of the ideas of the philosophers are actually also in a very non-confrontational manner. They slowly penetrate into the broader theological and intellectual ideas of Muslim and Islamic civilizations. So although Falsafa eclipses as such under theology, it nonetheless continues. It's not the case that it completely vanishes. Ibn Sina is highly sought after, respected, read, etc. for centuries afterwards as well. But there is a problem that to call a man a philosopher, philosophy was associated with being with heresy, etc., with being an infidel. And that's why many people stopped using the label of falsafa and started using the label of hikmah. And so that way, the ideas of philosophy sort of came into Islam without necessarily feeling like they contradicted religion as such. So let's talk about political science. What the philosophers called political science formed part of practical philosophy, which was divided into three parts. There was ethics, household management, and politics. So ethics has to do with myself. How do I conduct myself? Household management is how do I take care of my wife and children and slaves, etc. And yes, I might also have slaves. And yes, it is addressed to the man, etc. And politics is then about the broader, community as such. So the whole focus of it, of course, is control. Control over the self, control over the family, and then control over society as such. Man's highest aim was to seek intellectual and moral perfection by study and self-control in order to purify his rational soul and enable it to survive the death of his body so that he would live forever as pure soul in blissful contemplation of the truth. This is also a very philosophical theme. You can see it has its origin in Socrates and Plato. It is that man is a thinking animal and the soul is the thinking part of the animal, and the soul longs to be reunited with that transcendental realm of ideas and so on, and that philosophy opens the path to that, etc. Now, just before Al-Farabi began to write, there were two very important philosophers, really masters of their craft and art. They're not just philosophers, they are, they are brilliant in medicine, etc. They're brilliant in many, many other fields. They're brilliant scientists, in fact. That is, Abu Bakr al-Razi and Ibn al-Rawandi are both people who argue in such a way and say certain things that put their ideas in contradiction, or at least in apparent contradiction, with revelation. In other words, they are arguing in a way that reason is somehow superior to revelation, because you can come to the truth without the aid of a revelation, they say. This collision is, of course, means that the perception that people have of Al-Razi, etc., is that these people are heretics because they don't believe in revelation. They are always going on and on about reason and logic and evidence and so on and so forth. So Al-Farabi actually wanted to temper this trend. Okay, he wanted it to calm down. There's some good things in philosophy, but you're taking it a little too far. Philosophy and religion, he said, do not contradict each other, they complement each other. Okay, so we're not going to put them in collision with each other. Instead, they're on the same path, etc. So Al-Farabi, 870 to 950, wants to create a synthesis of Neoplatonic thought as well as Islam. He argues that Islamic thought has two sides, in fact. The familiar one is to be found in Muslim history books, and another is to be found in Plato. In other words, what Plato is saying is not too different from what Islam is saying, in fact. The Prophet is the philosopher king that Plato talks about. He is the lawgiver. The Sharia is the law, the constitution that Plato talks about, according to which a good polity, a good republic will come to rule itself. The Muslim community was the polity itself. Of course, the Ummah is the polity. And the philosophers, in fact, carry the legacy of its founder, that is the Prophet, peace be upon him. So the philosophers will carry forward the ideas of Prophet, peace be upon him, and synthesize both these things together. Agar sachai ek manzil, if the truth is a destination, then the path to that truth, there can be two paths to that truth. One is the path of Burhan, the other is the path of Iqna. So what is the path of Burhan? It is the path of philosophy. It is by demonstrating something. So philosophically, through logical syllogisms, through proof and evidence and scientific experiments, you prove something, right? That's the path of philosophy, through logic and through reason and through rationality and so on. But there's also another part, which is the path of religion. And religion also takes us to the exact same truth. It takes us to the exact same destination, but it takes us to that path in a different way. And what is the different way? Religion represents philosophy in symbols. It represents philosophy in images. It represents philosophical ideas metaphorically. And it is, why is that the case? Because it's for common people. It's for people in general. Religion is philosophy in popular form. So religion is basically teaching philosophy to all these people who would not be able to understand philosophy if it was taught in the way in which Aristotle writes it. Those who dismiss religion, etc., are ignorant of its symbolic nature and of its social value. Religion plays a very important role in binding a community together. Of course, nobody can deny that, because look at the history of Islam. Without Islam, the Arabs would not have come to be bound together into a community, and then into a state, and into a state that became a super state, in fact, a global empire, etc. So that role is played by religion. So you don't put it down, he said. Philosophy, though, gives timeless, objective, correct, universal answers. Okay? So this is very much a Platonic idea of what is the truth. In Plato's conception of the truth is timeless, it is objective, it is correct, and it is universal. It is always true regardless of time and space. In fact, that is the main mudda of Socrates against the sophists, etc. That the truth cannot be relative. It has to be timeless and objective. And that was his main crux of his argument, etc. Whereas religion, on the other hand, are metaphorical. They're symbolic. They're allegorical. When you talk about the talking plants and bushes, etc., you have to understand that that is actually trying to teach you something different. They're designed for historically contextual publics. They're talking to specific people. The prophets are talking to, when religion is revealed, it is talking in the language of the people to a specific people. So the revelation comes in the language of the people that it is revealed to. And it comes in the metaphors of the people that the people will be able to grasp and understand and so on. And that is why there are different religions in the world. The reason why there are different religions in the world is not because the end point of religion is different. It's always going to be the same. But because each religion is talking to a different set of people and in a different time in history and so on. And so the people that prophet, that religion is being revealed to, the people who that particular prophet is talking to, is going to talk in the idiom and the language of that people can understand. And that's why you see this apparent contradiction, which is actually just only on the surface. Prophets were those able to formulate the philosophical insights in language that the masses could understand. Religion offered a relative and approximate answer, therefore, because it is in metaphor, it is in poetry. It is in poetry. For that reason, it doesn't give you like that kind of formulaic answer like F is equal to MA type of answer. But it will give you a broad conceptual understanding of what is being stated. So Platonists, of course, had routinely distinguished between these two levels of the truth, etc. This is taken on by Al-Farabi now and taken on pretty much by all the Muslim philosophers. So Plato's Republic was based on philosophy, just as Hazrat Muhammad, peace be upon him, Ummah was based on Islam. Plato's Republic and Muhammad's Ummah are based on the same principles. Philosophers had ultimate responsibility for its guidance. What does he mean over here? What he means is that Plato and Aristotle, both, mainly it's actually Aristotle, they look at a society and they say that a society has to be judged by its teleology, by its end goal, just as everything is judged by its end goal. So what is the society trying to get to? What is Pakistan trying to be? What are the values of Pakistan, in other words? What are the values of Pakistanis, and so on? Right? That will tell you whether that society is good or bad, etc. And for Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, what was the goal of life? It was to gain knowledge. Especially for Socrates and also for Plato, less for Aristotle, who said, oh, you have to temper it a little bit, also have a good time, etc., which was the golden mean, actually, which also is very much part of Islamic literature. The end goal of the society determined whether the society was good or not. And the kind of society that Prophet, peace be upon him, created also was a society whose end goal was the perfection of the self, that the soul would be able to perfect itself and gain knowledge, gain the knowledge of this world, gain the knowledge, divine knowledge, and come closer to what is God, which is the ultimate knowledge of all the universe. The only way for the whole of the human race to attain salvation is that philosophical and political authority, therefore, should be united in Al-Farabi's view. Al-Farabi also changed around all the terms. So Jahil in Al-Farabi does not mean somebody who's ignorant of Islam, but it means somebody who's ignorant of philosophy, which of course Islam also is in metaphorical form. Jihad means war for not just for Muslims, but for good principles. Muslims can also follow bad principles, okay? And what are the good principles? The attainment of knowledge. Malik is a king in a new sense, to which political power is incidental. Yani ke Malik can be somebody who's a king, but a king doesn't necessarily mean that you're in power politically. You could be a Malik in your own right because you have 4.0 GPA or something. The philosophers have to speak in riddles, on the one hand because they want to filter out unworthy opponents, also because of hostile rulers. Philosophers always write in difficult words. Why do they write in difficult words? Part of the reason is that they're saying things that if people understood what they were saying, people might not like them very much if they said it in plain words. So they write for the elite. And if you make your writing very hard, who's going to read it? Only the elite. Because you have to be highly educated to be able to read it. Fine, this guy's not going to say anything bad to me because he won't even understand what I'm saying in the first place, right? So They've been doing this for generations by now, okay? Now, Al-Farabi said that when cities come together, there can be a jahil city. What is a jahil city? A city that pursues honor, wealth, domination, pleasure, bare necessities of life. This is jahalat, okay? What is a virtuous city, therefore? A virtuous city is that when people come together, people cannot obviously live without cooperation. As Aristotle said, man is a social animal. Nature has designed them for life in a city, in a polity. That's classic Aristotelianism. So they can combine for a variety of reasons. One is, of course, the base reason, roti, kapda, makan hame mil jaye, chalo, we're happy with that. And there can be other reasons. We combine because we want to conquer everybody. Or we combine because we want honor, or we want glory, or we want to be the best footballers, or cricket players, or javelin throwers, or whatever else, right? We want to have this, or we want to have that, or I don't know, whatever it is, right? But what if you combine for the purpose that you want to study? So that can't happen. That you want to gain knowledge, sir, kya baatein kar rahe hain? That you want to learn as much as there is to learn. And not for the grade, oh my God, blasphemous idea. Not for the grade, but just for the love of learning. I know this is an alien concept to all of you. But imagine that we were to come together just for the sake of learning. Such a city would be a virtuous city. Such a polity would be, such a society would be a virtuous society. This is what he calls Medina Fadila, which is a virtuous city. Medina just means city, by the way. And who could lead this city? Who could lead this society? Obviously people with the most knowledge, those who had PhDs and, and so on. Not that I'm pointing at anybody, I'm just flexing my arm, They're the ones who are going to lead it. The philosophers would lead such a city. This is classic Plato. This is basically the Republic, but now in a Muslim form, right? And we would even be able to establish world peace. They would no longer be fighting between religions. In fact, what would happen is, although Plato is just talking about one city, Al-Farabi is not saying one city. There can be groups and groups of cities of this sort that can come together. And how would they come together? They would come together that while the masses would pursue their own religion, so the Christians are praying in their own way, and the Buddhists are praying in their way, and the Hindus are praying in their way, and others are praying in their way. Meanwhile, the elites of all these societies, who have not just and the elites are not people who are interested in money and interested in fame and fortune and honor and conquest and so on. What are they interested in? Knowledge, right? What are they interested in? Philosophy. So the elites of these societies who have read philosophy will be able to cooperate with each other for the betterment of all societies. There will be a universal class. A philosophical elite would form a single universal class that would rise above religious differences. And they would be able to explain to their own peoples, etc. The philosophical elite of the Christians would be able to explain to the Christians, nahi, humne jange nahi karni Musalmanon ke khilaf, humne, ya maybe it would be, I'll take the example of India, they would be able to explain to Indian people in a Hindu metaphor, in their own metaphor, why they should not be fighting us, and we would be able to explain to our people why we should not be fighting them, and that we should be cooperating and working together for a better world, etc., etc. So people would continue to live in different religions, but the elites, having read philosophy, would talk a common language and would be able to build a new world. Power was intellectual rather than material. The great philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle have made an enormous contribution, just as like the great prophets, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, peace be upon them. And they are, in a certain sense, for Al-Farabi, they form this continuity, because philosophy and religion should not be seen distinctly or in contradiction, but as one thing leading to the same result. So Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are just as precious to us, ought to be just as precious to our civilizations, etc. True power was intellectual rather than money or weapons. Look at me. For example, my wallet right now is empty, right? And yet I have true power because I have the wealth of knowledge, etc. And a true king is a philosopher, okay? Not somebody who wields a sword, etc., but somebody who wields the sword of knowledge and philosophy. Whoever perfected himself in intellectual and moral terms would rise to the level of philosopher king, even if they were not in power, said Al-Farabi. Even if you're not in power, doesn't matter. You have a power that they can never imagine. The truth has a power that no lie can defeat. And also he said, कोई फ़ायदा नहीं आपकी नॉलेज का अगर आपने यूट्यूब के वीडियोज़ नहीं बनाए, because the philosopher who does not teach is in vain. If you have all that knowledge and you're just keeping it to yourself, then you're bloody useless. Put it out in a book, put it on YouTube, teach other people, etc. Now, Al-Farabi was hugely influential in his time. And they looked like a moment was coming maybe when his ideas could just dominate even, right? Because this is a grand intellectual synthesis of many, many different traditions, really phenomenal, work, etc. But no, it was not to be. So philosophers now began to debate whether one could pursue the highest truth in isolation rather than through communal life. If society was not ready to accept philosophy, what should philosophers do? Now, Al-Farabi realized that philosophers were not going to make it as the official elite, so he then began to write about how virtuous people could live in corrupt regimes without losing their virtue. Yes, I live in Pakistan, I teach at LUMS, but I have to stay pure to my own philosophy. And I am forced to live in these corrupt times in Pakistan. They had to practice a combination of external conformity and internal resistance. So yes, Bahir, I will be the dutiful professor. He will do everything as he's told to do. But inside, I am this rebel who wants to see knowledge come to the fore, etc. I can't help it. It comes out at times in my teaching, as you can see, right? Hence, the virtuous city would become now not necessarily a political entity, but would become a brotherhood, a community of philosophers that could talk to each other. We don't need the whole country to be philosophical, etc. We'll just build our own philosophy club. We'll call it the Al-Farabi Hegelian Marxist Club, etc. And we're happy because within that realm, we can pursue our knowledge, etc. and be a brotherhood. So in other words, whereas Al-Razi gave individual salvation a powerful expression when he rejected organized religion, Al-Farabi now toned it down and began to argue that organized religion was necessary for society and for educational purposes. However, those who had achieved intellectual and moral perfection could dispense with it. Now that is very radical. So in fact, the philosophers didn't need to get to the truth through the methodology of the clergy. He would reject it. Good and virtuous men did not need laws, but freedom from political rulers was impossible. So Falsafa did not free a man from the demands of rulers, but it did hand the keys of salvation to the individual philosopher. Outwardly, I'll conform to what society is saying, but inwardly, I will pursue my aims, my Socratic aims of developing myself to the best that I can be. All men of intellectual ability could become imams unto themselves in spiritual and moral terms, according to Al-Farabi. Interesting. Here is a beautiful statue of him in Central Asia and so on. Okay, quickly now with just 2-3 more people. Ibn Sina was also looked at religion as a social scientist. That means he was looking at the social function and role of religion. He's not looking at religion and saying, I must do this in order to get to heaven. He's looking at religion and the role that religion is playing in society. He argued that humans cannot manage without a lawgiver, without prophets, etc. and so on. And Ibn Sina's lawgiver, as Hazrat Muhammad, peace be upon him, he is considered the ultimate lawgiver. Islam is identified as the best popularization of philosophy, and Sharia is equated to the best embodiment of philosophical insight, although Ibn Sina had also abandoned Al-Farabi's vision of a universal elite, which, as you know, was already being abandoned in the time of Al-Farabi himself. Next up, very quickly, we have Ibn Rushd, who was in Spain, and he argued that religion and philosophy were also, again, both paths to the same truth. Again, classic Al-Farabi. There was no conflict between them. To attack religion was to attack basically social life. He argued that cities are united for a common purpose, and much like Plato's Republic, his view was that society must subordinate the individual to the collective good. So he's not a liberal in the modern sense, because liberals all will say individual liberty is the most important thing. Saying that individual liberty is not important. What's important is what the society as a whole tries to achieve. The part exists for the whole. You exist for society as a whole, for the ummah. And just as organs exist for the body, the heart or the whatever exists for my body as a whole, a common purpose unites a society. Private interests therefore destroy the collective interests. And that is why he argued that the ruling class, at least, the ruling elite, the guardians of society, the philosophers who are going to guide society, they should not have any private property. They should not have any land. They should not have any wealth. They should not even have any families or children. They should just live in this kind of Platonic communism. This is Plato's idea. Because if I have children, if I have a family and I have children, then I will love them more than I love the rest of society. I will want for them more. If you want to serve the state, okay, you don't have to live without kids. If you don't want to serve the state, then don't. You just live an ordinary life, have your kids, do your thing, etc. No problem. But if you want to be the man who leads the state, then you have to give up on all of these things. You can't have your own property, and because then you'll start caring कि ये मेरा घर है, हाय कितना खूबसूरत है, अगर इसमें एक फेंस और आ जाए तो और भी अच्छा लगेगा, एक स्विमिंग पूल में और डाल दूँ तो बुरा तो नहीं होगा, you know. So you'll start caring about that house, and when you start caring about yourself, you start taking away from the common, what belongs to the common good. But the argument here, of course, is if you have everything, you want a little more of everything, and that's not good, right? You should have nothing. So anyway, this would promote love amongst them. They should eat together, the elite, the philosophical elite. They should eat together, they should live together, they should study together, they should solve the problems together. This will create love between them, and it would create a solidarity between them, and it would ensure that they serve the public good. Ye sare politicians ko, you just make them poor, and you make them live without families, and all they do day and night is just study how to solve the problems of Pakistan. Aise masle hal honge. Then we have Yahya al-Surwardi. He also interiorized the virtuous city of Al-Farabi. The corporeal world, he said, the material world is just a stage for kings and sultans and those with power. There is a more important invisible realm between this world and the next world. That is the realm of knowledge. And he elevated the ideas of prophets, philosophers, sages are the pillars of the universe. They can raise earthquakes and tempests, ruin entire nations, cure the sick, satiate the hungry, make wild beasts obey, ascend to the light, appear in any form, walk on water, fly in the sky, and traverse the earth. And if you think that's impossible, he said, you can do it too. Yes, you can. Anyone can acquire this intuitive, visionary knowledge, wisdom, and divine power, because every soul has a portion of God's light. So the soul is made of light, and that light belongs to God. And you have one small part of the divine spark within you. You just have to realize it inside of yourself. Now, what was the response of the people to the philosophers? The people basically thought, these guys are so elitist. My God, they're so arrogant. My God, they're so abstruse. I can't understand anything they're saying. And frankly, they're just a bit offensive as well. Falsafa is at variance with Islam on many important points. For example, firstly, the bodily resurrection. Okay, the philosophers would say that it's your soul which will go up to heaven. Okay, it's your soul which will go up to heaven. Now, that's classic Plato, etc., etc. And so what did the theologians say? Abhi maine soul ka kya karna hai? I want my body there. I want also to be able to drink from the beautiful rivers of honey and milk, etc. I want to have all the pleasures that I forwent in this world. Tariq Jamil is amazing. Okay, why is he amazing? Because he knows, why is he so popular first and foremost, okay? You can laugh at him and stuff, but there's a reason why he's popular. Why is he popular? Because he promises to the people that they will get in heaven all the things that they are denied in this world. All the horrible things they have in this world, they will get all of them in heaven. Like, for example, in one place he says, God himself will pour wine, the angels will pour wine, etc. We will have complete liberty, etc., etc. Of course, mainly he's talking about men, so you girls are out of it, but that's a bit sexist. But anyway, the point is that if I don't have all those beautiful things that I was denied in, what's the point of, imagine, you live in poverty your whole life. You live in privation your whole life. You don't have enough food to eat. Your children are hungry. Your parents are hungry. You lived a good life. You prayed 5 times a day. You did your Hajj, Roza, Zakat, everything you did. Zakat obviously couldn't do because you didn't have any money. And then somebody says to you, oh, your soul will go to heaven where you get all these wonderful ideas and you'll have all this knowledge. You're like, what do I want knowledge for? I want good food. I want milk. I want honey. I want all the things that I was deprived of in this world. That's what I want. So there's an appetite that people have. So anyway, that's why philosophers were not really like, they said, your soul will go to heaven and you learn everything there is to know about the world. And I don't want to learn. I want to have what I was deprived of. Second, so I understand why the people rejected philosophers, frankly. Secondly, divine providence. They had different views on that. They had different views on the eternity of the universe. They thought that matter has always existed, and that God, when he said kun, he changed matter into form, etc. But that formless matter had always, in a certain sense, existed. They also were of the view that reality is accessible to human reason. You can understand everything through reason. And this, again, was something that people rejected, because there were so many things that people just couldn't understand. Like, for example, an earthquake came and it eliminated my family. What reason can you give me for that? For the pain that I've suffered? What reason can you give me? You can't give me any reason for that. So the world is not a reasonable place. For them to argue that you could understand it from reason just kind of grated on the experiences of people. Religion was merely a utilitarian institution of lesser truth value than the rational deductions of philosophy. All throughout I've been saying, philosophy gives you the exact truth, and religion is like poetry and metaphor. So in this view, the common people said, what are you saying? You're saying philosophy is kind of the more exact version, and religion is kind of the more inaccurate version. And philosophy is inaccessible to those poor people, etc. So religious scholars were more in demand as preachers, as teachers, as prayer leaders, as legal experts, as administrators of charities, as go-betweens, and so on and so forth. Religion was the only official truth. Educated people cultivated philosophy, but in private. Okay? They read philosophy, but they read it in private.